This week, we're talking cold storage, quarterly hogs and pigs, and June acreage data. Welcome to the weekly livestock market update here on Brownfield. I'm Brent Barnett, filling in for Megan Grebner this week. With us, as always, is University of Missouri's Scott Brown. Scott, how are you doing here this week?
Hey, I'm doing great, Brent. It's time for that 4th of July holiday here before long.
It's an exciting time for sure. And we're going to be digging into all the details of this week's report coming up, Scott. But first, let's get a recap of what happened this week in the markets.
Yeah, Brent, if we start on the cattle side this week, we'll call live fed cattle about $1 lower on the week. Those feeder cattle markets were steady to $3 higher this week. And on the future side, the August live cattle futures contract was up $2, and the August feeder cattle contract was up $1. We might also mention July corn futures. They've lost a little more than 50 cents over the last 2 weeks, which I think has been helpful on those feeder cattle futures. Choice box beef prices were $2.20 higher this week. If we look at the hog side, cash barrels and gilts were down $1.10 this week. The July lean hog futures contract was down $2.30, and the pork cutout value lost $1.60.
It seemed like the direct cash cattle trade was pretty sluggish throughout the week until we got to about Friday, right?
Yeah, that's right. We still have pretty light volume this week in giving you that roughly $1 lower. So we'll see if we get more cattle traded here very late on Friday.
We had weekly slaughter. Curious to see how things shook out there, Scott.
Yeah, so USDA tells us for the week ending June 29th, the run of 609,000 head of cattle this week. That is 11,000 head less than we did last week and 42,000 less than we did a year ago. On the hog side, bigger run this week, 2.421 million head of hogs this week. That's up 2,000 head from last week and up 91,000 head from where we were a year ago.
Scott, without a July cattle inventory report from USDA, what will we be looking for as we move forward as far as signs of herd expansion on the cattle side of things?
Yeah, I think there's two things, Brent. You bring up a good topic here because I think we can look at some other data that I think helps us, even though we're not going to get that July report. Number one, I was looking at beef cow, federally inspected beef cow slaughter January, and we have January through May. It looks like we're if we look at that slaughter and estimate for June, we'll have slaughtered about 5.5% of what was beginning inventory of beef cows. I often say that's got to get at least below 5% before we're talking about holding cows back. And then the other piece is just what's the percentage of heifers on feed. And if you look at the April data, which is the most current that we have, a little more than 38.5% of on feed inventory were heifers. So for me, both of those suggest probably if we were to have gotten a July cattle report, beef cow inventory would have still been down about 1.8% or so relative to where we were last July.
What's the outlook on consumer demand? Are we expecting that to hold up?
I keep having concerns, I guess, and maybe concerns is not the right way to frame it, but certainly questions about consumer demand thus far. I think it's been as good as we could have hoped, given that we are pushing near record prices at consumers. We'll continue to watch and see whether interest rates and other issues eventually get consumers to look at perhaps some alternative meat protein sources, trying to cheapen up that food cost.
Let's talk about cold storage. Any surprises in the data here this month?
So Brent, not a lot of surprises when we look at what we had in freezers at the end of May. If we start on the beef side, we had 424 million pounds of beef in freezers at the end of May this year. That was down 0.5% relative to where we were a year ago. When we look at what we've been seeing on the beef side, as we started the year, we had a bigger decline relative to previous year. The end of May kind of comes back to where we're close to where we were at the end of the year, but stocks continue to tighten slightly. On the pork side, 482 million pounds of pork in freezers. That was down 9.4% relative to where we were last year. So that decline continues. Both bellies and hams were lower. We did see an uptick in loin ending stocks on the pork side of the equation.
What's the cold storage data do for producers? Is this something they need to be keeping an eye on?
So, Brent, I use it a little bit. I'm always a little cautious here, and you realize we're producing about 2.2 billion pounds of beef and 2.2 of pork, about the same amount these days. Ending stocks is just another little bit of measure of whether pipelines are getting full or not, but we don't want to read too much into that data. I just say when we're talking about stock levels that are below year-ago levels, it tells me that consumer demand's not slowing down any, and gives us that little bit of additional read on the demand side of the equation.
Let's turn to quarterly hogs and pigs. Is the June report a big one, Scott? And what did we see here this month?
Well, we've certainly been wondering about what's happening on the hog side of the equation. With the quarterly hogs and pigs report we got out this week, I guess for me, a few things stick out in that report. Number one, I was curious if we were going to talk about a big decline in breeding inventory. The report came in with breeding inventory at 96.8% of a year ago. For me, that was near where we were the previous quarter. So we've been running about 6 million head of breeding inventory, a little more than that, but right near 6 million head. So a lot of sideways as we've gone through this year. The other piece of the puzzle, pigs per litter, which, by the way, that breeding inventory number of 96.8 came in below the bottom end of the pre-report estimate. So that piece of the puzzle might have been positive. Pigs per litter, March through May, came in at 101.8. That was a little bit below where we would have expected, but continued growth in pigs per litter. I take those two things and put them together, and I go, more pigs maybe in front of us, but it's an industry on the supply side that's been going sideways of late. If you look at for a second at the individual states here, Iowa down 90,000 head of breeding inventory, Texas down 50,000 head, and Missouri down 40,000 head. Those were the big movers in terms of losses in breeding inventory.
With those three states, is that worth watching?
I think it is. Now, I will say, we did have growth in some states: Colorado, South Dakota, Kansas. For me, in some cases, this is, can I get sows further away from where I'm trying to finish hogs as well? Texas probably doesn't stick out for that reason, but I think when you look at a state like Iowa, perhaps trying to move sows away, just working on less disease pressure, being away from that market inventory.
What movement in the markets could be expected from these numbers, Scott?
Yeah, so I think given that it's a lot of sideways, I keep saying I think prices are a lot sideways. We've certainly had better prices as we've gone through 2024 than we expected, but we look at of late, it's just been a lot of sideways, maybe even a little down. I think as we get later this year, we're going to have more market hogs, perhaps, as we get in the last quarter. Maybe that's going to weigh on prices. So maybe there's an opportunity for a little bit of price risk management on the hog side, just trying to make sure we avoid as much of the potential for lower prices as we look later in 2024.
Well, certainly a big week of reports. Let's also get to the June acreage report and how this ties in with the livestock industry.
Yeah, so I'll say livestock producers ought to be smiling just a little bit, especially if they aren't in the corn production business. USDA gave us 91.475 million acres of corn in the report today. That's up from what was basically 90 million acres in March intentions. I think that's been part of the reason for lower corn prices that we've seen today in the marketplace. USDA also told us more stocks of corn than pre-report estimates would have suggested. So lower feed costs may still be in the future here for the livestock industry. So I think that's a positive piece out of that report. Now, on the soybean side of the equation, USDA gave us 86.1 million acres of soybeans in the June acreage report. That was down about 400,000 acres from the March intentions report came in, and was at the low end of the pre-report estimates, just as corn was at the above the upper end of the pre-report estimates. So soybeans a little tighter than maybe folks would have thought beforehand.
Do you think we could see some future adjustments considering some of the weather challenges we've seen here of late?
Yeah, absolutely, Brent. You bring up a good point. When you look at what's been some of the flooding issues in parts of corn country, what's going to happen to harvested acres is certainly still unknown at this point. I won't be surprised for USDA to also resurvey some on the planting side, just given there's still several acres left to be planted yet, given where the report came out today.
A lot of great information here, Scott. What's coming up? What should we be keeping on our radar?
Yeah, so next week we're going to get a little bit of demand side information. We get a jobs report next week. And we'll also get monthly trade data to see what kind of beef and pork's leaving the U.S., as well as a little look at beef imports as well.
Well, Scott, it's always great to fill in and catch up with you. Hope you have a great weekend, sir.
Hey, thanks, Brent. I appreciate it. You do the same.
Thank you. Again, that's Scott Brown with the University of Missouri. Now, to have our weekly livestock market update delivered to your email inbox every Saturday morning, you can go to our website at brownfieldagnews.com, and you can also submit some questions and comments there as well. And also be sure to check out the Market Minute program hosted by our very own John Perkins. I'm Brent Barnett on Brownfield. Have a great weekend.